Yes, I can help with Joshua Selma N sermons. Apostle Joshua Selma N is a Nigerian Christian minister, teacher, and founder of Monomania. His sermons are widely known for their depth. Listen carefully. Marriage is not merely a social arrangement, it is a covenant reality established by God himself. And whenever God establishes a thing, hell rises to challenge it. Many destinies have been tied to the success of your marriage. Many prophetic seasons depend on the peace of your home, and the enemy knows this. That is why marriage is a covenant reality designed by God, and because of its prophetic importance, it attracts unusual spiritual attention. Every marriage carries with it a divine purpose, something God intends to manifest on earth through the unity of two people. This is why the enemy walks tirelessly to attack marriages. He understands that when two people walk in unity, their destiny impact becomes multiplied. The scripture says, one shall chase 1,000, but two shall put 10,000 to flight. That means marriage is not just companionship. It is a spiritual weapon that threatens the kingdom of darkness. So the enemy does not wait for a marriage to become strong before he rises. He begins early, planting seeds of misunderstanding, frustration, suspicion, and discouragement. Many couples don't realize that what they are facing is not just a personality clash, but a well-coordinated demonic strategy designed to break their covenant bond. Because marriage is divine in origin, it must be protected by divine power. You cannot sustain a covenant reality by human effort alone. This is where many people become wary. They use psychology, anger, manipulation, silence, or emotional withdrawal to manage battles that were initiated in the spirit. But you cannot counsel out a spiritual attack. You cannot negotiate with a demonic influence. You cannot reason with a voice that seeks to divide. There are battles you cannot fight with logic. They require the intervention of the God who instituted marriage. When unseen forces begin to influence behavior, perception, emotions, and communication, you must rise in the realm of the spirit and say, Lord, fight for my marriage. Because if God does not defend it, the pressures of life and the weapons of darkness may overpower human strength. Many people underestimate the spiritual intelligence of the enemy. He does not always attack directly. Sometimes he uses distractions, emotional exhaustion, financial strain, or the wounds of the past. He stirs old memories, amplifies small mistakes, increases the weight of expectations, and magnifies the weaknesses of your spouse. Little issues suddenly become mountains, and impatience begins to replace understanding. You begin to assume motives that were never there. You begin to interpret silence as rejection. You begin to see your spouse as the enemy instead of recognizing the real enemy behind the conflict. When marriage becomes a battlefield, it is often a sign that the invisible realm is already involved. This is why you must remain spiritually awake. Marriages collapse gradually, not suddenly. What begins as small neglect becomes emotional distance. Emotional distance becomes cold communication. Cold communication becomes suspicion. Suspicion becomes irritation. Irritation becomes anger. And anger, if not healed, becomes separation. Behind this progression is a spiritual force that understands timing, patterns, and weaknesses. But there is hope. God never designed marriage to be sustained by human skill alone. He stands as a witness in every covenant, and when invited, he rises to defend the union he established. When God fights for a marriage, strange peace begins to return. The atmosphere shifts. Communication becomes easier, hearts soften. Misunderstandings dissolve. Love is rekindled. Wisdom flows. The home becomes light again. And this is not because human effort suddenly improved. It is because the divine hand stepped in. A marriage that God fights for becomes unbreakable because God does not lose battles. The enemy may try, but he cannot overcome the covenant presence of God. Therefore, acknowledging the spiritual nature of marriage is the first step towards sustaining it. When you recognize that your marriage is a divine covenant constantly targeted by spiritual forces, you stop fighting your spouse and start fighting the real enemy through prayer, discernment, and dependence on God's help. And as long as God is the defender of your home, no attack will prevail, no voice will divide, and no plan of darkness will succeed. Evil voices are among the most subtle and destructive tools the enemy uses to destabilize marriages. These voices are not always loud or obvious. Many times they come as whispers, suggestions, impressions, fears, and thoughts that gradually shift the atmosphere of a home. Every marriage hears voices. The voice of God bringing peace and direction. The voice of your partner expressing needs and emotions, your own internal voice shaped by experience, and then the deceptive, manipulative voice of darkness seeking to divide what God joined together. The danger is not merely the presence of these voices, but the fact that many people cannot distinguish where a voice is coming from. Whenever confusion suddenly increases, whenever suspicion grows without cause, whenever resentment rises from nowhere, whenever small issues feel overwhelmingly large, it is often because an evil voice has been allowed to influence the heart. These voices come from different sources. Sometimes it is the voice of past trauma, memories of rejection, betrayal, or abandonment from previous seasons, attempting to rewrite the narrative of your current marriage. When the enemy wants to ruin a home, he often begins by resurrecting emotional wounds and making them feel fresh again. Sometimes it is the voice of external influence, friends, family members, colleagues, or advisors who plant negative interpretations into your mind. One careless sentence such as, "Are you sure your spouse really loves you?" can become a seed of distrust. Sometimes it is the voice of comparison, measuring your home against others on social media, imagining that someone else has a perfect partner while yours falls short. Comparison always breeds discontentment, and discontentment gives the enemy a legal entry point. There are also spiritual voices, voices that come from altars, curses, ancestral patterns, and generational cycles. If divorce, separation, infidelity, or long-standing marital breakdowns run in a family line, the enemy uses these patterns as spiritual voices that declare, "You will end up the same way." They seek to influence behaviors, provoke overreactions, and stir unnecessary arguments to fulfill the negative pattern. Many couples assume their struggles are purely natural, when in truth, there are voices working behind the scenes, manipulating emotions and magnifying weaknesses. Evil voices target perception because perception shapes response. Once your perception of your spouse is corrupted, even their kindness looks suspicious and their silence feels hostile. The enemy does not always have to attack your spouse. He can attack how you see them. A marriage can be destroyed not by lack of love, but by distorted perception. And perception is shaped by the voices you allow into your heart. Another way these voices operate is through exaggeration. What is small suddenly feels unbearable. A minor misunderstanding begins to feel like a collapse. The enemy magnifies weaknesses until you can no longer see strengths. He amplifies flaws until affection reduces. He inflates problems until solutions seem impossible. All of this happens because a voice is whispering behind the scenes, intensifying emotions and reducing clarity. To overcome these voices, couples must develop spiritual sensitivity. Discernment is crucial. You must learn to question the origin of a thought before accepting it. Not every strong feeling is truthful. Not every thought is yours. Not every fear is prophetic. Some are planted. When a thought pushes you toward pride, isolation, unforgiveness, bitterness, or disrespect, it is almost never from God. The voice of God brings wisdom, peace, humility, and direction, never unnecessary hostility. The solution is to silence these voices through prayer, alignment with Scripture, and open communication. Prayer exposes the hidden whispers of darkness. Scripture renews your mind and provides a filter for your thoughts. Communication with your spouse eliminates misunderstandings and prevents silence from becoming a breeding ground for deception. And when God's voice becomes the loudest in your home, every evil voice loses power. Evil voices only succeed when left unchallenged. But when a couple stands together in spiritual intelligence, recognizing the schemes of darkness, they become unshakable. The enemy's whispers may come, but they will find no place to rest. And by the power of God, those voices will be permanently silenced. There comes a point in every marriage where human effort reaches its limit. No matter how intelligent, patient, or emotionally mature a couple may be, life presents battles that exceed human strength. There are situations where conversations do not solve anything, where explanations only create more confusion, where apologies don't heal wounds, and where logic cannot untangle the invisible forces influencing the home. This is because not every marital conflict is natural, many are spiritual, and when a battle has spiritual roots, human strategies become insufficient. This is the moment a couple must recognize the necessity of divine intervention. There are battles you cannot fight alone because the enemy attacking your home is not flesh and blood, but principalities, patterns, and unseen forces that understand your weaknesses better than you do. Many marriages collapse not due to lack of effort, but due to misplaced effort. When a spiritual attack rises, couples often fight each other instead of fighting the real enemy. They try to fix the external symptoms without addressing the internal spiritual cause. You cannot heal spiritual manipulation with arguments. You cannot break cycles with emotions. You cannot silence demonic influence with silent treatment, anger, or avoidance. These methods only exhaust the heart and drain the relationship further. The battle becomes heavier because the tools being used are inadequate for the kind of warfare involved. When darkness has a legal foothold, whether through past sins, generational patterns, negative words, or emotional wounds, human intelligence cannot dismantle it. It takes the intervention of God to uproot what has been planted in the spirit. Divine intervention becomes necessary when the heart becomes too wounded to reach for healing on its own. There are times when one or both spouses feel so misunderstood, disconnected, or exhausted that they no longer have the strength to try. Prayer becomes difficult. Communication becomes strained. Affection becomes inconsistent, and hope begins to fade. In such moments, only the God who created the heart can touch it in a way that brings restoration. He knows how to soften what has hardened, how to illuminate what has been darkened, and how to bind what has been broken. Human love can get tired, but divine love never runs dry. Human patience can reach its limit, but divine mercy renews itself daily. Human understanding may fail, but divine wisdom is limitless. There are also battles that come from external influences, friends, family, environments, spiritual attacks, or financial pressures that were never part of the original design of the marriage. These forces place strain on the relationship in ways neither spouse anticipated. Sometimes one party becomes spiritually weak, emotionally distant, or morally vulnerable because the pressures surrounding them are too heavy. In such moments, it is not criticism they need, it is intercession. You cannot always correct what you cannot see. You cannot always fix what you cannot understand. But God sees the unseen and can reach places no human words can reach. The necessity of divine intervention also becomes clear when the enemy has launched an assignment against the destiny of the home. Some marriages carry prophetic significance. Children with special assignments, ministries hidden in the union, generational blessings waiting to emerge, and the enemy fights these marriages violently. This is not a battle human strength can win. Only God can fight against what was designed to destroy the future. When God steps into a marriage, the impossible becomes possible. Walls that stood for years crumble in moments. Misunderstandings dissolve without lengthy explanations. Hearts soften without pressure. Forgiveness flows without force. Clarity replaces confusion. Peace replaces tension. The atmosphere shifts, and what seemed irreparable becomes a testimony. Divine intervention does not merely repair what is broken. It transforms the entire foundation of the relationship. Recognizing when you need God's help is not weakness, it is wisdom. Marriage is a divine institution, and anything divine must be sustained by God Himself. When you invite Him into the battles you cannot fight, you position your home for supernatural victory. And once God fights for your marriage, no force in hell can prevail against it. When God steps into a marriage, He does more than silence the voices of darkness. He amplifies His own voice, and this becomes the turning point for restoration. Every home has many voices competing for influency. The voice of culture, the voice of society, the voice of experience, the voice of personal expectations, and the deceptive voice of the enemy. In the midst of all these, the most important voice a marriage needs is the voice of God. His voice brings clarity where confusion once lived. His voice brings peace in the midst of emotional storms. His voice brings direction where the path forward seems unclear. Every successful, enduring marriage has learned to prioritize the voice of God above every other influence. For the voice you follow determines the future you experience. When God amplifies His voice in a home, misunderstandings begin to dissolve. The noise of accusation and suspicion becomes quiet. Suddenly, the couple begins to hear wisdom instead of anger, instructions instead of assumptions, and perspective instead of pressure. God's voice has a way of calming emotional turbulence. Where the enemy once whispered discouragement, God now speaks hope. Where guilt once condemned, God speaks forgiveness. Where fear once predicted failure, God declares that restoration is possible. This is why the enemy fights so aggressively to drown out the voice of God, because he knows that once God's voice becomes the dominant influence, his manipulation loses its power. One of the greatest gifts God gives a marriage is spiritual discernment. Discernment is the ability to hear what others cannot hear and see what others cannot see. It is insight that comes from above, not from experience. When God's voice is amplified in a person's heart, they begin to discern the true origin of their thoughts and emotions. They learn to recognize when a conflict is not natural but spiritual. They understand when they are overreacting because of exhaustion rather than malice. They know when to speak and when to remain silent. They sense when the enemy is trying to provoke an argument. This ability to discern is what protects a home from unnecessary battles and emotional injury. God's voice also brings alignment. Many marriages suffer not because of lack of love, but because of lack of agreement. Agreement does not mean sameness, it means unity of purpose. When God speaks, He aligns hearts toward a common direction. He softens stubbornness, heals pride, and restores humility. He reminds each spouse that marriage is not about winning arguments, but about preserving destiny. His voice realigns misplaced priorities bringing spiritual matters back to the center, restoring devotion, reminding the couple of the importance of prayer, and rekindling honor. Where the enemy tried to sow division, God's voice restores unity. Another powerful effect of God's amplified voice is healing. Many marital wounds are deep, not physical but emotional and spiritual. These wounds are not healed by time alone. They require a word from God. One word from God can melt years of bitterness. One revelation can dissolve long-standing resentment. One encounter with His presence can soften a heart that seemed unreachable. His voice does not merely correct, it comforts. It does not merely instruct, it restores. The healing that comes from God's voice goes beyond the surface and reaches the roots of the heart, bringing genuine transformation. God's voice also brings hope, fresh, living hope. Marriages often deteriorate not because of catastrophic failures, but because hope quietly dies. When hope is gone, effort stops. But when God begins to speak again, hope rises. Suddenly, what seemed impossible begins to look possible. Strength is renewed, vision is restored, love becomes alive again. The atmosphere shifts from heaviness to expectation. Ultimately, when God silences evil voices and amplifies His own, the marriage begins to operate according to divine design. Peace becomes normal, not rare. Wisdom becomes natural, not forced. Love becomes intentional, not mechanical. The home becomes a place where the presence of God dwells, and where His presence dwells, the plans of darkness cannot stand. The voice of God is the anchor that keeps a marriage from drifting, and the light that guides it into lasting victory. Every marriage is influenced not only by the present choices of the couple, but also by the unseen patterns flowing from their family lineage. Many households carry generational histories of broken relationships, constant conflict, emotional disconnect, infidelity, premature separation, or long-standing marital unhappiness. These patterns do not appear randomly. They are spiritual cycles, repeating behaviors, inherited mindsets, and ancestral struggles that silently shape expectations and reactions. What many couples fight in their marriage is not only each other, but the weight of battles their parents and grandparents never won. This is why depending solely on human effort becomes insufficient. Spiritual cycles require spiritual solutions. When God steps in, He breaks these negative patterns permanently, ensuring that what destroyed other marriages in the family will not destroy yours. Generational patterns often start subtly. Someone grows up in a home where arguments were frequent, so strife becomes normal. Another person saw love expressed inconsistently, so emotional instability becomes familiar. Some watch their parents sleep in separate rooms, so intimacy feels optional. Some saw one parent constantly dishonored, so disrespect becomes acceptable. Others witness infidelity or mistrust, so fear becomes part of their emotional makeup. All these experiences form invisible frameworks that influence how a person shows love, processes conflict, or expresses vulnerability. Without divine intervention, these frameworks can unconsciously reproduce the same dysfunctions in a new marriage. But patterns are not just emotional, some are deeply spiritual. There are families where marriages consistently fail at the same stage, where betrayal repeats itself across generations, where divorce becomes the norm, or where peace is never sustained. These are not coincidences, they are altars speaking against marital destinies. As long as an altar has not been confronted, the cycle continues. But the moment God arises, altars are torn down, curses are broken, and the cycle loses its power. What defeated your parents does not have the authority to defeat you. When God becomes the defender of your home, God breaks patterns by first opening the eyes of the couple. Revelation is the beginning of deliverance. When God shows you that what you are experiencing is not just personality difference, but a repeating family cycle, you become spiritually equipped to resist it. Awareness is power. The enemy thrives in ignorance, but the moment light comes, his influence weakens. God also breaks patterns by empowering you with new wisdom. He teaches you what love looks like in a healthy marriage. He shows you how to communicate respectfully, how to handle conflict maturely, and how to create an atmosphere where peace can flourish. These are not just skills, they are weapons of transformation. God breaks patterns through healing. Many generational cycles continue because old wounds were never addressed. When God heals emotional scars, bitterness loses its grip, fear loses its voice, and anxiety loses its hold. He restores confidence in love, renews trust, and softens hearts that life has hardened. A healed heart does not repeat the mistakes of wounded generations. Divine intervention also provides the grace to start new patterns of prayer, forgiveness, patience, and honor. What was once normal in your family may no longer be permitted in your marriage. You become the one chosen by God to rewrite the narrative of your bloodline. Your home becomes the starting point of a new cycle, a cycle of unity, laughter, peace, and covenant faithfulness. When God breaks patterns, he does not only stop the old, he empowers the new. And perhaps the most beautiful part is this: when God fights generational battles on your behalf, your children will never have to fight them. The peace you establish becomes their inheritance. The victory you secure becomes their foundation. Your marriage becomes a testimony that generational patterns can be broken and a new legacy can begin. When God steps in, the old cycles lose their authority, and your home becomes a place where the future is brighter than the past. K-point no, expended in 600 words without heading. There are times in a marriage when what is broken cannot be repaired by human strength or emotional effort. Wounds inflicted through misunderstandings, harsh words, unmet expectations, or seasons of neglect can run deep, affecting the heart in ways that seem impossible to heal. When pain accumulates over time, couples often begin to function together outwardly while being disconnected inwardly. Affection becomes mechanical, communication becomes strained, and the once vibrant bond begins to feel like a distant memory. It is in these moments that divine restoration becomes essential. Only God, the creator of the human heart, can reach into the hidden places where pain has settled and bring genuine healing and renewal. Restoration begins with the recognition that God is the ultimate healer. People may apologize, adjust their behavior, or try new communication techniques, but none of these can heal emotional wounds that have spiritual roots. Some wounds are tied to rejection, insecurity, or abandonment issues that originated long before the marriage. Some are linked to words spoken during heated moments, words that pierce deeper than anyone realized. Some wounds come from seasons of silence, where one spouse felt unseen or unheard. Human words may try to comfort, but only the voice of God can mend the brokenness at its root. When God touches a wounded heart, anger softens into understanding, bitterness transforms into forgiveness, and hopelessness gives way to renewed desire. God restores trust, one of the most fragile pillars of marriage. Trust is not rebuilt instantly. It is a process, but God gives the grace needed to walk through that process. He renews the mind, helping spouses see each other not through the lens of fear or suspicion, but through the lens of love and truth. He breaks the power of negative thoughts that replay past mistakes like a loop. He replaces them with assurances that healing is possible and that the relationship can be stronger than before. Trust restored by God becomes deeper and more stable because it is anchored in His wisdom, not human promises. Another aspect of restoration is the revival of affection. Many marriages lose the warmth and tenderness they once had, not because love has died, but because it has been buried under layers of stress, disappointment, or emotional fatigue. God knows how to breathe a life into affection again. He rekindles desire, restores closeness, and awakens the tenderness that once defined the relationship. He removes emotional numbness and replaces it with compassion. As God works, simple gestures begin to carry meaning again: a smile, a conversation, a touch, a shared moment of laughter. These small sparks gradually rebuild the flame. He restores communication as well. Many couples stop communicating not because they do not care, but because communication has become a battleground instead of a bridge. Words begin to feel risky. Vulnerability feels unsafe. Silence becomes easier than confrontation. But when God restores communication, He brings humility to one heart and patience to the other. He teaches them to listen with understanding rather than defense. He gives them words that bring peace instead of conflict. He removes the spirit of offense and replaces it with the spirit of understanding. When God becomes the center of communication, even difficult conversations lead to healing instead of division. God also restores spiritual alignment in a marriage. When one or both spouses drift from spiritual intimacy with God, the marriage naturally becomes vulnerable. Without prayer, wisdom dries up. Without scripture, perspective becomes shallow. Without spiritual covering, the home is exposed to unnecessary battles. But as God restores, He draws both individuals back to Himself. He revives the desire to pray together, to seek His guidance, and to keep His presence at the center of the home. A spiritually aligned couple becomes a powerful force, united, discerning, and resistant to the schemes of darkness. Ultimately, divine restoration does not simply return a marriage to what it used to be. It elevates it to something stronger, healthier, and more resilient. God does not patch broken pieces. He rebuilds with new strength. What seemed irreparably damaged becomes a testimony of His ability to heal, renew, and transform. When God restores a marriage, the past loses its power, the present becomes peaceful, and the future becomes filled with hope. Prayer is not only a rescue strategy for marriages that are already in crisis, it is also a protective covering that secures the future. Many people wait until their marriage is wounded before they begin to pray. But wisdom teaches that prayer must go ahead of you. Just as a farmer prepares the soil before sowing, a person who desires a successful, lasting marriage must prepare spiritually long before the wedding day. Prayer shapes the atmosphere around a marriage even before it begins. It exposes hidden traps, reveals counterfeit relationships, breaks ungodly soul ties, and delivers a person from expectations shaped by past pain or wrong experiences. When you pray early, you invite the hand of God to build what human preparation alone cannot sustain. One of the greatest benefits of prayer is that it removes wrong people and wrong relationships from your path. Many heartbreaks, disappointments, and unnecessary emotional wounds could have been avoided if people had prayed ahead of time. Prayer reveals the true intentions of those who appear charming. It exposes what is hidden beneath the surface. It prevents emotional attachment to someone who carries an assignment of distraction or destruction. When you pray concerning your future marriage, God begins to separate you from environments and influences that will sabotage your destiny. You may not understand at the moment why certain people walk away. But prayer ensures that whoever is not aligned with your future cannot remain comfortable in your present. Prayer also aligns your heart with God's timing. Many people force relationships out of pressure. Pressure from age, culture, family, or loneliness. But pressure-driven decisions often create long-term pain. When you pray, God gives you the grace to wait without fear. He delivers you from the desperation that leads to wrong choices. He strengthens your discernment so that you choose based on destiny, not emotion. Timing matters in marriage because even the right person at the wrong time can create unnecessary battles. Prayer ensures that you are emotionally, spiritually, and mentally ready for the covenant you desire to enter. For those already married, prayer becomes a shield that protects the union from silent battles. Not every attack announces itself loudly. Some begin quietly, small irritations, unexplained coldness, sudden distance, financial pressure, or external temptations. Prayer detects danger before it becomes visible. It reveals when the enemy is planting seeds of misunderstanding. It exposes the open doors that need to be closed. Prayer becomes the voice that speaks peace into the atmosphere of the home. A praying couple is difficult to defeat because prayer keeps their hearts soft, their spirit sensitive, and their bond strengthened. Prayer also gives you the grace to see your spouse through the eyes of God. Human love often becomes blind during conflict, but divine perspective restores compassion. Sometimes the person you are married to is not difficult, they are wounded. Sometimes they are not unloving, they are overwhelmed. Prayer helps you discern their true condition so you respond with patience rather than frustration. It teaches you to fight for your spouse instead of fighting against them. Prayer equips you to be a spiritual covering, standing in the gap when they are weak, interceding when they are under attack, and speaking life into their destiny when they cannot speak for themselves. Another powerful aspect of prayer is that it invites God to govern the home. A marriage that God oversees cannot collapse under demonic pressure. Prayer keeps His presence active in the home, and where His presence dwells, confusion cannot reign. Prayer establishes boundaries around your union, ensuring that evil voices, strange influences, and manipulative forces are silenced. Prayer breaks cycles before they begin. It ensures that your children inherit peace, not patterns of pain.